Hello and welcome to the No Balls Podcast. I'm your host, Patrick McDonald, with me co-host Sheldon Kaufman. Today we are starting what's hopefully going to be a fun series for us. This is the Redraft series. Today we are doing the 2010 NBA draft, and we're going to progressively go all the way until about 2020, because we might not even do 2020, but that's how we're going to go with this. Real quick, before we start the actual exercise, trivia question, Sheldon.
All right, Pat. Hopefully, this one will be a little bit easier than our all-star question last episode. But more recent, who is the player with the most points scored in a single quarter in NBA history? Most points scored in one quarter.
This is Clay against the Kings, right? Like
Very good.
37 or something.
Very good. And you got the number too. Yep. 37 against the Kings.
Yeah, some Clay Thompson highlights are fun. Um, he was so good. He'll be in the next redraft episode that we do. He was 2011 draft. Today we sit with the 2010 draft. Just quickly, like as a retrospect, this draft, and you can say your piece on this. I think this might be the most underwhelming one that we do, which is great to kick off the series this way. But I think the guys at the top are very fascinating players, more so than some of the guys who are kind of slam dunks at the top of other drafts. I think some of the guys at the top here are really fun to talk about. Just your quick pieces on this draft in general.
Yeah, not very stacked as opposed to other draft classes. I'm sure we'll get to. That was just kind of my first glance at looking at it. Kind of after, like a lot of guys that went in the lottery didn't really do anything in the league. But like you said, there are a lot of guys. There's a couple guys in here near the top, sure, of our redraft that we're gonna do that. Um, if there weren't some injuries, they would be a lot better than they are. I think, in my opinion. So yeah.
I agree. The injuries too. I think this is commonly referred to as the cursed draft class. It feels very cursed. We'll go ahead and go to the start. This is a draft where your Washington Wizards held the first overall pick and drafted who would be John Wall, who would be the franchise player for some decent Wizards teams. And I'm interested in what your philosophy was grouping towards the top of the draft. For those who don't know, we're doing just the lottery here. How did you feel about just the very top of this draft? Maybe the first couple picks. How did you feel in grouping
Um,
the players?
are you talking? I looked at team fit and kind of what they ended up doing in their career. Um, I looked at the rosters that the teams were coming into the draft with, and based off that, I made selections where I think that the players would be best fitted, would fit the best, and just overall, like what players had better careers.
Yeah, I think I primarily focused on best individual players, but team fit is also a very important thing. Um, just if you had to put like a tiering, do you feel like there is a clear tier one of a couple guys? How did you feel about the top like 6 or 7 in this class?
Yeah, I think there's definitely some tiers. Obviously the stars of the draft. Which, can I go ahead and say it, or do you want me to wait?
I mean, for
I'll
those who
wait.
don't, for those we said John Wall, Paul George is in the draft, DeMarcus Cousins, Gordon Hayward. Those are the big names in this draft, popularity wise. Um,
I do think there's tiers in this draft. And there's definitely some drop offs between the tiers. I think it's really goes from like superstar to role player. Um,
like right away.
yeah, it's hard. There's definitely like guys that I think that are like a lot better role players for sure. Um, but yeah, it goes from superstar to role player slash six man kind of role in my opinion, or good bench depth, I would say.
Okay. At the very top, how many guys did you consider for first overall for Washington?
I would say About three, but there was one obvious. In my mind, there was one obvious choice.
Okay.
So yeah.
So for me, I really only considered two, and it was because for me, I felt like there was a clear number one guy in this draft, and I think he's a fit on every team basically ever. And that's Paul George, and he was my top guy here. And then I felt there was a tier of a couple other players following him, but I did consider John Wall, because he actually went there, and I don't think it was necessarily a bad pick whatsoever.
No. Yeah. I agree. I took Paul George. I think Paul George should have went one to Washington. If you kind of look at it, we had Nick Young as our kind of backup guard, and Gilbert Arenas was still only 28, coming off a year where he averaged 22 points a game. It would have been really interesting just to kind of let Gilbert Arenas rock out, maybe, and then add Paul George into the mix. Keep Nick Young. I think we eventually traded him to the Lakers, or maybe he walked away in free agency. Maybe Nick Young stays longer because there's no John Wall. Paul George would have thrived in Washington. I think we didn't really have any good wings at that point, besides Caron Butler and then a couple of aging guys. So I think that it would have been the best. Would have been a really good fit for Washington.
Yeah, specifically with the 2009-10 Wizards, they had a decent, honestly, like a better team than I would have thought for a number one overall pick team. And then they trade Antoine Jameson and Caron Butler at the trade deadline, and they really just go all out to get John Wall here. They had the Golden State Warriors dynasty's bench on their bench with Nick Young, JaVale McGee, and Sean Livingston. And Sean Livingston was a guy who I was really like, you know what? Like, seeing as what he became in Golden State, like, he only played, or wait, he played 18 or 26 games with the team, and he was traded there at the deadline, like I thought. Like, it could have maybe worked out in Washington if it had been given more time. But since they took John Wall in real life and they already had Gilbert Arenas, like, it just wasn't going to work with Sean Livingston. I think it could have been interesting. Maybe if that's the destination here with them taking Paul George. Um, Other than that, it still looks like it's a rebuild selecting Paul George to this team. And they would definitely hope that they can find themselves, another a big later down the line as well. So I guess since we're in consensus there, that gets us to a range. How far did this next range go for you? You muted yourself.
I muted. I unmuted and then muted.
Okay.
Sorry. At the 2 pick, I mean, I think this is probably three guys I can consider the 2 pick here, or
Okay.
really two. I think, in my opinion.
I had for me it was Paul George at the top, and then I had a group of 5 guys that I felt were kind of in the same range. Um, yeah, so it was at 2. Uh, for me, I ended up on John Wall. What did you end up with?
I took DeMarcus Cousins at 2.
Okay. So for me, I'm a little bit lower on Boogie. John Wall for me, at least on this Philly team, like, you look and they have Iguodala, they have Drew Holiday, who, those were both really good players for a while, and they already had Lou Williams as, who would eventually become a really good sixth man. For me, like, I understand the liking of DeMarcus Cousins, and like Samuel Dalembert isn't very exciting. But I just really liked, John Wall at his peak was an excellent playmaker. Between 2015 and 2017, his assist rates were over 46%, which is like ridiculous stuff. And him and DeMarcus Cousins, like, efficiency wise, are like kind of the same for me. Not just for me, but like in general, they are like fairly similar. Um, so I ended up with John Wall. because I don't really have a concern about his fit with Drew Holiday playing together, both as like 6'4", 6'5" guards. Um, in doing this exercise, how did you feel about with the information we have now about modern basketball? Like when you see Thaddeus Young as a 23-year-old power forward, did you think in 2 years the league's going to be shooting threes a lot more and Thaddeus Young's going to be a center? Was that something
Uh,
that?
yeah, I did take in like like if you're a big, can you stretch the floor? That's a huge fit. And just being able to shoot the three ball, just in general in today's game, I definitely did take that into consideration. I took a new school approach to kind of like if I was a GM, what do I need for my team type of deal. So is
Yeah,
that what
so
you
for
meant?
me as well, like I guess it's kind of similar with the Livingston stuff. It's like I know later down the road that Sean Livingston turns his career around as a bench player. And at the time, Washington definitely didn't have that knowledge that that would happen. But this is a redraft. We have this knowledge, and we want to pick based off of this knowledge. It's like if today the Jazz are in a position where they're trying to make a pick, and then they're leaning towards Cooper Flag, but they're like, no, Johnny Juzang, he's going to be a multiple time defensive first team guy in a couple of years, and he's going to shoot the three ball at an elite crib. Enough on Johnny Juzang. John Wall, DeMarcus Cousins for you. Um, I we'll get to Boogie for me because I do like Boogie, but I felt like this was the last fit for Boogie early on the top of the board, and uh, I thought John Wall was probably the better player.
Yeah. So I went with Boogie because they already had two good point guards in Drew Holiday, who was only 19 at the time, and Lou Williams, who was also 23. So I mean, getting another young guard just kind of starts stunning development. Kind of what I was thinking, and just looking at the team overall, they had no big man. I mean, they did have Iguodala, who was I think their leading scorer, um, but they didn't really have a true big man. Boogie came into the league and he was he was just elite for the Kings, just a great rookie. And then in his prime, Boogie was a top five center. Um, Even when he was on the Warriors and barely playing any, when he played in the playoffs, he was amazing. He shot, oh wait, where is it? Okay. He ended up shooting 33% from the 3 point line, which was really good back then. 46 from the field. So he was pretty efficient as a shooter. He averaged a double double for his career, almost 20 and 10. So I mean, a dominant big man on that Philadelphia team early. You don't have to draft Joel Embiid. You don't have the process year maybe.
Yeah,
So I that's just kind of I like DeMarcus Cousins being that big man. Um, I was thinking John Wall as well, but like I said, they had two good point guards. And DeMarcus Cousins was a better 3 point shooter than John Wall. So,
yeah,
um, not but no, I mean, it was really hard, but I just went DeMarcus Cousins more overall the fit, and not really. Yeah, I think DeMarcus Cousins would have been good there.
yeah. I like it, and I think the process thing's very interesting because originally they selected Evan Turner. I think I forgot to mention that. If they nail this pick and they get John Wall, I think he fits next to Drew Holiday. Maybe Drew Holiday still gets traded and later down the line they end up with, Anthony Davis or something. Or not Anthony Davis, Nerlens Noel like they did in real life. And like that's still a pretty solid pairing and would be the best center that John Wall played with for the entire like first stint of his career. Um how I see John Wall and DeMarcus Cousins are very similar. I can see the lack of efficiency with them. Um and think that yeah, that's probably not a great thing. But I also wish that these guys played with some better teammates throughout their primes because I don't think either of them really ever played with that great of teammates. Um,
Yeah, Boogie had Tyreek Evans for like maybe 3 years, 2 good years from Tyreek Evans, but that
Yeah,
was
it was
basically
rough.
it. Yeah. Yeah, that is rough.
And John Wall got like a couple like sub all-star seasons from a young Bradley Beal, and it just felt like there was not much else on Wizards talent, or those Kings teams were very rough. So I just wish that we could have seen these guys play with some better players, because specifically Cousins, because I was really surprised to go back and see that this was a guy who is like, league average efficiency throughout his prime as a big man. It very much concerned me. So number 3 for me, I understand liking DeMarcus Cousins here. This is the Nets. They originally took Derek Favors. This was thinking that Derek Favors could play the 4 next to Brook Lopez. They would later trade Derek Favors like a year later. Um, for me, just because we have the update of modern basketball, I'm not gonna take another big to play here. Even though I do think DeMarcus Cousins is probably a better talent than Gordon Hayward, I think Gordon Hayward's a lot closer than you would think. The couple years that he had in Utah, um, right before he goes and snaps his leg in half. And I think the fit's a lot better if you look at these Nets teams. This was the one that I looked at and I was like, damn, that is a poor, like, it was Brook Lopez and um,
Courtney Lee.
Courtney Lee. Courtney Lee was a big one, but he didn't even play on the team the next season. But knowing what we know now, Courtney Lee's going to be back the next year, and Devin Harris was there, but I don't know how many other good years he had after this. Um, and I think just on this current roster, I think Gordon Hayward fits a lot better. And then, you look back and he was consistently a guy who would be around 20 points per game in his time last couple seasons in Utah, and like his efficiency, like I mentioned it with Boogie and John Wall being below league average. Like Gordon Hayward was like between like 6 to 8% above league average his couple seasons in Utah at the end, and that's how I kind of just landed with Hayward here. And I think that Hayward specifically will fit better next to the player they get in the next year's draft. Not that they got that player in real life, but a player that they could get in a next year draft. And it's important to note this is before the horrible Paul Pierce, Kevin Garnett trade for Brooklyn. So they should have their next picks unless they want to trade him again. So
Yeah, I like that, Pat. I don't think taking Boogie there would be the move, especially with Brook Lopez there. And he's pretty young at that time, from 21, yeah, so he was really young back then. So good decision there. I like that pick. I'm gonna go with a guy that I'm gonna go John Wall, obviously. He's a top. I mean, he's one of the best, one of the better players just in this draft overall. And we talked about some of those guards that just kind of like aren't great. Courtney Lee and what was the other one? Devin
Devin
Harris.
Harris, 26.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, these guys were below average shooters. Assist numbers weren't really there at all as point guards. John Wall's a guy that loved to dish the rock, as you said earlier uh, in your explanation of the pick. I think it would have been great with Brook Lopez. Um, just it would have been fun to watch, especially as Brook Lopez starts to find his range throughout his years. Uh, like the John Wall and Brook Lopez pairing, I think would be a franchise, two franchise pieces. And then you don't have to go and make those Kevin Garnett trades. You can keep your picks, you can keep building. you have your point guard for the future, you have your center for the future. Now you just got to get the role players, the 3-and-D guys. So I think John Wall would be a great fit for the Nets.
I agree. I guess towards the end here, we're gonna like come up with a conglomerate answer for us. Um, at number 4, this was Minnesota. They originally selected Wesley Johnson. Didn't go very well for him in Minnesota. This was a weird one for me because my brain is telling me DeMarcus Cousins is definitely a better player, but I look here and like their leading scorer was Al Jefferson at 25 years old. And then they have Kevin Love, who hasn't had his most improved player season yet, and he's 21 years old. And knowing what we know now about Johnny Flynn, who was their starting point guard this season, I kind of just landed on Eric Bledsoe because he was also surprisingly a lot better than I remembered him being. His couple seasons in Phoenix, towards the later end of his Phoenix stint, were some really impressive seasons, and I feel like that's where I think would be best for Minnesota to go here.
Yeah.
Just reading
I
his
like
true
that.
shooting,
Oh, sorry.
7% above league average, 4% above league average, 3%, 2%, 5%, mainly in Milwaukee in 2018. Like he was actually really good player. Defensively, he was really solid. And since they just already have a bunch of big stability with their leading scorer and Kevin Love, that's why I end up here. Even though I do think Cousins is definitely a better player. I think Bledsoe's just close enough to where this is a fit decision for me.
All right. Well, I definitely had Bledsoe going high. Not that high, but after the explanation, I like it. I also kind of went with a guy here that's on the maybe not smaller things, but definitely more athletic side of things, and that's Gordon Hayward. Uh, this is a team, like you said, their main scorers was Al Jefferson. Um, they had they had okay guards, not really, but I think that Gordon Hayward would just come in here and just do really good. He averaged 37% from 3 point line, so he was able to stretch the floor. He was able to score down low, um, play a little bit of defense. I think it would have been a nice addition for this Minnesota team. And Gordon Hayward would definitely make an impact. And once Kevin Love makes that next jump, it would be even bigger for them. And maybe they're able to be good enough to where they don't have to trade Kevin Love to the Cavs.
Yeah. I think if I would have had DeMarcus Cousins to Philly, then I would have definitely ended up with those top four guys going. Because for me, it was Paul George, then Hayward, Wall, and Cousins, just talent wise. Then Bledsoe was kind of off by himself with one other player who I do have going 6. Um, and for me, I guess number 5, I had DeMarcus Cousins going right back to Sacramento. Um, unfortunately for him. Um, but yeah, I for me it's just Boogie. I really wish he would have played with a better team, because then I would have a lot better indicators of what he would have been like as the lead guy with competent roster, or what he would have been like as a complimentary guy next to another star. And I just feel like I've already seen Hayward and Bledsoe do that. And I feel like John Wall with his passing ability would be a little bit better in that role. Because honestly, at the top, do you think any of these guys were like superstar 1A guys, even including Paul George?
Paul George maybe for like 3 years, but besides that, I can't say so just because of the injuries. Like it kind of it halted what they could have been. So no, I don't I would say maybe Paul George, but besides that,
Yeah, I ended up with like OKC, and then his first couple Clipper years, Paul George probably was at that level,
what
but
about Indiana? He wasn't there yet. You don't think?
I think he was on the way.
All right,
I think
I'll
he
take that.
was
I'll
a
take
little
that.
bit less of
He's
an
breaking
offensive
out.
player. Yeah. Um, yeah, I think his offensive game really came around uh, in Oklahoma City. And then John Wall, I was kind of close on, because there's the rim pressure aspect, there's the passing ability. Um, and those, the 2017 Wizards were a 47 win team. I think outside of, you know, maybe that even might be better now. Well, because Paul George, he was on a couple of 50 win Pacers teams, but they were like 50 win teams based off of their defense. Not really.
They were
Paul
good.
George,
They had
they were,
Granger and Hibbert. Like when Hibbert was still pretty good, I think. Like right when
uh,
he had that like 3 year run.
yeah. Granger wasn't even really a big part of those teams, but Paul George was a guy we'll get to later in this draft. Lance Stevenson was. They were a really great defensive team, is what is what is the consensus on those teams. I think Paul George really leveled up in his second year in OKC, and then I think after the 2021 season, he kind of physically wasn't consistent enough with playing, to where his game's just visibly on a lower level. Um, I guess where did you have 5 here?
All right, it got interesting for me here, Pat. I think Sacramento was right in picking a center. I think they did need some big man help. They had Jason Thompson and Spencer Hawes, who put up respectable numbers, but nothing too crazy in my mind. And also their rebounding just really wasn't there for them. Two centers, both average under 9 rebounds a game. And they have a guy in Tyreek Evans, who I mentioned earlier, who was a baller. He won Rookie of the Year this last
Mhm.
year. And he was good for the Kings his whole tenure until he got suspended. He was a pretty solid player. So I went with who I thought was the second best center in this draft, and that's Greg Monroe from Georgetown.
I, I was
Uh,
expecting another name.
I like Greg Monroe because I like his rebounding aspects. He ended up with 8 rebounds a game for his career. He had 13 points. That's the best you're really going to get from a center out of this draft. Besides DeMarcus Cousins, and they needed center help, so I think they get Greg Monroe. He ended up playing 10 years in the league, so they get some longevity there. They get a guy that can get boards and score down low. Doesn't fit in a kind of modern NBA where you want big man to shoot the three, but I think he would be able to survive like he did um, on the Kings, and it gives more range to Tyreek Evans. I think maybe Tyreek Evans becomes more than he already was. Greg Monroe handles the boards, so I went with Monroe.
Yeah, I felt the same way with them needing a center, so I sent them back to Marcus Cousins. Um, Number 6, Golden State. In real life they attempted Epke Udo to be their starting center. They were really thin as center looking at their roster. Um, and for me, I went right back to center and I went with who I would assume would be considered the steal of the draft, and it was Hassan Whiteside, who in real life did get selected by the Kings in the second round. Um, I feel like he was by far the best defensive center in this draft, and looking back to what the Warriors needed once they entered dynasty form, um, Hassan Whiteside is best fits that more than any of the centers in this draft, and I don't think he would have pushed them out of Klay Thompson in the next year's draft. So I like Hassan Whiteside for them. Who did you have for Golden
Yeah,
State?
I went Hassan Whiteside as well for all the same reasons. I I ended up going Monroe over Whiteside, but I think Whiteside would be a great fit for Golden State just for all the reasons you mentioned. Hold on, let me get to him. He's in the second part of the draft.
Yeah, way
Uh,
late.
okay, thank you. Um,
Initially, I didn't realize him until I sorted by who led this draft in rebounds. Is when I first
yeah.
saw
Okay,
him.
here we go. Um, yeah, he shot well from the field. He was an okay 3-point shooter, like really okay, not really too crazy. So he definitely would fit better in this kind of era. But we saw the Warriors have made great ones with centers like Zaza Pachulia. So I don't think they really were too worried about like shooting centers. And I think Hassan Whiteside is way better than Zaza Pachulia. So I think that those Warriors teams would even be better. I think Hassan Whiteside's a great fit. Like you said, he can play defense. Like you said, he led the rebounding, led the class in rebounding. And then DeMarcus Cousins was right behind him. Um, yeah, they weren't really looking for much offense because they had Monte Ellis and Curry. They also had Steven Jackson. It's interesting, but they had the guard situation pretty filled up. I think they were set in that aspect. So I think go grab the best center available, and that's Hassan Whiteside.
Yeah, just a slight correction. He didn't lead them in rebounding. He was towards the top for this draft. But yeah, Hassan Whiteside. We're in consensus here. And
Yeah, he led the class in rebounding, the draft class. I
Basketball
just want to.
Reference has him
That's what
at
Basketball
4.
Reference is saying.
Wait, what? Is it per game?
Oh yeah, it's per game.
Okay. I went by totals.
Oh, I'm a
Um,
per game type of guy.
yeah, I wanted to see like overall who produced the most, and he is fourth behind Paul George, Favors, and Cousins. But we'll keep going now. Seven was the Pistons, and I go through and I looked at this Pistons team. They weren't like too bad in the regular season. I mean, they were 27-win team, but like you look forward and there were no pieces that amounted to really anything. Rodney Stuckey was 23, averaged 16 and a half points per game for them. Didn't end up becoming much in the NBA. Jonas Jerebko was their starting 4. He ended up kind of having an NBA career. Long-term wise, he was 22. And then Ben Gordon on the downhill at 26. And then Rip Hamilton at 31 years old. And he didn't go very much longer. And Ben Wallace was
35.
35 as their starting center. I was just like, well, shit, they have nothing. So, and this was at the point of the draft where I felt there was a huge drop off to where these are solidified role players. Like, none of them really have any flashes of much upside. Like, even Hassan Whiteside, but I feel like Hassan Whiteside had, like, if you blink twice and then you pull your eyelids, then he's a defensive player of the year candidate. For me, this is where it's a ton of role players here. And I ended up going with Avery Bradley. The original pick was Greg Monroe.
Great pick.
There's really no fit on this Pistons team because there's first of all there's no stars available, so you can't go star hunting, and then there's nothing on their already roster that it amounted to be anything for them. So I just was like, give me the guy who I think will fit best on a wide variety of teams, and I felt like that was Avery Bradley because he had like a truly elite NBA skill with his defense, and he could shoot corner threes very well, catch and shoot threes. Avery Bradley was my guy, specifically on the Lakers in 2020. Like, if I just had to give you the quick pitch on Avery Bradley, the Lakers won the championship in 2020. When Avery Bradley was on the floor, they were 3 points better per 100 possessions than their opponents. He made a championship caliber team significantly better. And I think that's why I go with Avery Bradley here.
Yeah, I like that pick. I'm gonna go with another guard. And I'm gonna get Eric Bledsoe with this pick. Um, like you said, they really didn't have any guys to go with. I thought that they were maybe a little bit. Yeah, they just like the point guard situation. There was a lot of aging guys. Besides the 23-year-old Stuckey, but he didn't pan out. So I think Eric Bledsoe gives them a scoring option. He ended up getting 13 points per game. He could shoot the three a little bit. He was a little bit below league average, but I think that you get your starting point guard in Detroit. Eric Bledsoe had a long tenured career. He was part of those really good Bucks teams when Giannis was first starting out, or when Giannis was in his prime, or starting to come on the scene when he made his whole transformation. He could play defense a little bit. I think that you have to go with Eric Bledsoe here for the Pistons to get a guard. Try to get someone out of this draft.
Yeah, I would have loved if Eric Bledsoe was still on the board, but I had him going 4 to Minnesota. Number 8 was the Los Angeles Clippers. This team was pre Chris Paul trade, and kind of their main guy on their roster was Eric Gordon, who ended up being a piece in the Chris Paul trade. Um, you look up and down their roster from 2010, and I mean, you see some pieces. Chris Kamen's there. He ended up being a decent stretch big, but it was, nearing the end for him. At this point, there's an old Baron Davis here. Um, that's a callback. And then outside of that, there's not too much that ended up having too much more staying power in the NBA. Um, and for me, I ended up with the same guy they ended up selecting, and that was Al-Farouq Aminu. Um, Al-Farouq Aminu, he doesn't like he doesn't sound very good, but he ended up having a pretty good career. I'll let you say who you had at this point while I pull up the numbers I wanted on him.
Here we go. All right, Pat. I ended up going with Derek Favors here. Maybe should have took a guard, but I'm gonna stick to my guts. They have a bunch of aging kind of wings. Marcus Camby's 35. Razul Butler's 30. Um, they have decent point guards right now. I think they can sustain that for a couple more years until maybe they go back into the draft and get a couple of those guys. But I like Derek Favors because he can play pretty good defense. He gives a little bit of scoring aspect to this team, averaging 10 points per game for his whole career. He shot decently from the field, about 53%. So he can score inside the arc. Not really a stretch the floor kind of guy. But it would be yeah. I think Derek Favors for the Clippers.
Yeah, I like it, especially next to Kaman, who was more of maybe he didn't really shoot threes. I think it was point 0.1 a game in the season prior, but he,
Yeah.
relative to other bigs, shot mid ranges and longer mid ranges. So knowing what we know now, he's shooting three balls in the corner. Um, with me with the Clippers, I kind of wanted to stay thinking that maybe future down the line, if you're telling me that Eric Gordon and Al-Farouq Aminu are going to be some of the main pieces in a Chris Paul trade, I think I really like just sticking with Al-Farouq Aminu. Just if you look at the stuff for him, I think for Aminu the biggest thing for me is on some really good Blazers teams where he was a starter, they were really good when he was on the floor. And they were not super great when he was off the floor, and he was kind of just a real glue piece. The 2019 team that made the or the Western Conference Finals was +8 when Aminu was on the floor, and they were minus 1.9 when he was off the floor. So that's a 10-point swing right there with Al-Farouq Aminu on the floor. I think that's kind of an indicator that he was a very good role player and he could fit next to star level players. Um, and it was pretty consistent throughout his Blazers career. It happened a little bit in Dallas when he spent a year in Dallas, and then in New Orleans his first couple years there, he was pretty consistently making them a better team as well. Um, so I'm sticking with the real pick because it ended up working out. It got them Chris Paul, and then he really wasn't a bad player, even though you don't think of Al-Farouq Aminu as a great player. He was pretty good. Um, at number 10, number 9, this was Utah. If you look at Utah back in 2010, they were a 53 win team. They were really good.
Yeah, that was shocking to me when I was first looking at it.
You look at this team, they already have Darren Williams. He's only 25 years old. Carlos Boozer, 28 years old. Young Ronnie Brewer, 24 years old. He's a good wing. I look here and I see we need some center help. But then I didn't really like the centers that were available. I considered Derek Favors for them because they ended up with him a year later in real life. I see the guy I ended up going with was Patrick Patterson. He ended up being a pretty good guy who could, he could fill in at the 3, at the 4. He's not going to play small ball 5 because they have Boozer and Millsap already to do that. And this really helps with Karolinko, who missed a ton of time for them. And I think, similarity wise, they aren't too far apart. Patterson as well. He ended up being on some really good Raptors teams, pretty not too far into his career. And just some of it was because of his ability to space the floor being kind of new to the game at that point, and it made him a lot better for teams in a way that was kind of unconventional at the time, but on some really good Toronto Raptors teams in 2015, 16, and 2016, 17, he had a plus 11 and a plus 10.4 on off. So this is like a guy who, like, I think eventually we can project him to really help good teams, and that's why I like him here for a 53-win Utah team who can use his talents at, the 3 and the 4 behind some injury prone and older players. And I'll check on how far Darren Williams was from being out. Who'd you have here for Utah?
I went at the guard position. I went with Avery Bradley. Just looking at the team, like you said, Deron Williams would have been a great guy to learn from. I think he was ninth in MVP voting that year, made an All-Star game. They already had Carlos Boozer. They have Paul Millsap. They have CJ Miles, who ended up having a pretty decent tenure in the NBA, I believe. So I think that you can get away. I think they're pretty. I think they're pretty good at the wing position, and maybe adding another point guard in there like Avery Bradley, who doesn't really take over a game offensively. He just scores when you need him to and plays really good defense, like you already said. He can knock down corner threes, and he helps the team win. Um, I think it'd be a good pairing. Just to have Bradley there, learn from Deron Williams for a little bit. Um, yeah.
Yeah, and this was Williams' last. He got traded at this year's deadline. I think some of that was because the team underperformed. We're hoping that whatever pick we end up coming to in totality will really help this Jazz team. 10 for Indiana. This was, another really great pick. They ended up with Paul George in real life. For Utah, they ended up with Gordon Hayward. Lance Stevenson was the guy who I ended up with because he was there. And in the second round, they ended up getting him. And I kind of like him here just because if you look at what the 2010s Pacers were, if you tell me Paul George doesn't replace Danny Granger and Danny Granger can like do a Paul George impression on offense as kind of an older player, then I feel like we can just make it work with the same team just without Paul George because they were a really good team and they weren't even that great offensively. So I kind of just want to get the pieces that were a part of that back, and I've already taken a lot of the wings that I think could have done the same thing that Lance Stevenson did on those teams. So I ended up with Lance at 10. Who would you have for Indiana?
I went guard position as well, but I went Jordan Crawford from Xavier.
Oh, wow.
I think I kind of looked at more maybe he could provide sparks of offense from him from the point guard position. He averaged like 12 points per game throughout his career. They need looking at it. I just think maybe Lance Stevenson is better defensively, but I just like Crawford's game a little bit more at that position. Um, yeah, I think he dishes the ball a little bit, but I just like Jordan Crawford. Maybe he becomes kind of like that offensive guy for them. Uh, yeah, Jordan Crawford at
Yeah.
10.
So Jordan Crawford was definitely a guy who I looked at and I was like, yes, I remember Jordan Crawford, but I didn't really think that he would be a guy I would select here, but he was also a really good scorer in his time. And I think that actually would have really helped these Indiana teams later down the line. Just to have a guy who like at the floor can give you like some just explosive offense. Um, and I don't remember what got him out of the league so fast. Um, but he fell out the league at a really young age. I think he only played 5 or 6 seasons. Um, and maybe that doesn't happen in Indiana. So I do like the Jordan Crawford pick. Um, maybe we'll find more on him before this episode ends. Because he was a second rounder in this draft, I believe. Um, but yeah, we'll go forward. Next, uh, was at number 11. This was New Orleans. New Orleans. This is a team that still has Chris Paul. This is, they're about to lose Chris Paul. So for me, this is all about what can we get that will immediately make this team a lot better. Um, and the name I landed on was Derek Favors. Uh, he was a guy who was pretty NBA ready right away. He could play big behind David West and Emeka Okafor. I really saw Derek Favors as just a center. Just knowing what we know now, he never really developed the additional skills. And the original pick here was Cole Aldrich, so I think this was kind of what they were going with. It just didn't work out with Cole Aldrich. Um, 11 the for the Pelicans or the Hornets, whatever.
Yeah, I went ahead and got Al-Farouq Aminu here with my pick. Looking at it, they just all their wings just are aging or already old. Peja Stovakovic, who is 32 and kind of out the door, and then besides that, you really don't have much else. And all the reasons you mentioned before, I really like Aminu. He can score the ball a little bit. I mean, these are role players. I think that he's going to be able to get in there, play some good defense, and knock down a couple floaters when he needs to.
Yeah, he was like almost can shoot the three. Is how I always ended up with Aminu. Like you can almost make him do it consistently.
Yeah.
And he gives you the defense. They ended up liking him anyway when he came there. So I do think that is a fair fit as well, and I think it does actually make him better right away. This was probably one of the more fun ones to make for me. At number 12, Memphis. Original pick was Xavier Henry. Never heard of him. Had never heard of them before this. Now, albeit he spent 5 years in the league, and I would assume by the end of it, he was just holding on to the back end of a bench spot. So that makes sense why I've never heard of him. I ended up with Ed Davis. Um, this is like a guy who sneakily stuck around really long. Um, you look, they already have their starting five: Rudy Gay, OJ Mayo, Zach Randolph, Marcus Gasol, Mike Conley, all of them under 28 years old. Young wing Sam Young and Ronnie Brew, who actually was on a different team by the end of the season. And they have a 24-year-old point guard already in Marcus Williams. I figured you get a guy in Ed Davis who played the four early in his career, who can play the four next to Marcus Gasol and the five next to Zach Randolph. I think that fits their front court really well. I ended up with Ed Davis. He sneakily played a long time, and wasn't an entirely bad player. He ended up playing on Memphis too, I think was another thing. And there were some decent results, and I'll pull those up while you explain your pick.
All right. So here I went with Lance Stevenson because this is the grit and grind Grizzlies, and um, there's no better definition for a grit and grind player than Lance Stevenson, in my opinion. Uh, they had an they had Mike Conley, but after that, coming off the bench, they had really no good point guard, in my opinion. AI got traded there, but he sucked there. He was terrible, and like he had all types of problem with management. I think he literally played 3 games. Um, So after having to deal with Marc Gasol, Zach Randolph, um, Mike Conley, then you bring in Lance Stevenson in for the bench minutes. And then when they end up getting Tony Snell in a little bit, I mean, I think that just makes them just a really good, a really hard team to score against. I mean, like they ended up being throughout the grit and grind Grizzlies era. I like Lance Stevenson here because he can also shoot the ball, or he can score the ball a little bit um, for the team. But I just think it's a good fit for him, being a part of that culture. Um, yeah.
For sure. Um, and I have to say, no means to dunk on Xavier Henry either. I'm sure he was a great player in his time. Um, yeah, Ed Davis, he ended up on the grit and grind Grizzlies, with basically this core, but with Tony Allen instead of Rudy Gay.
Oh, did I say Tony
Um,
Snell?
yeah,
Ah, fuck.
it's whatever. His first full year in Memphis, when Ed Davis was on the floor, they were +4, and there was a 2-point on-off swing when Ed Davis would go onto the floor. So he obviously was a good fit with this core, and yeah, I like Ed Davis in this role. Just go ahead and get him early while you can, and then they'll be extra acclimated. 13 for the Raptors. Um, for this one, it was like this is even before Kyle Lowry's there. I didn't think Jonas Valanciunas was there yet either. Very little there. I ended up just taking Evan Turner. Um, Evan Turner was like, when I looked back at these players on Basketball Reference, I was like, damn, he's a lot worse than I remember him being. Like, I don't know how he got to the 10 years that he played in the league, but it's because he got paid, and like I feel like Evan Turner was kind of miscast as a off-ball player for a lot of his career when he didn't have a jump shot and he was primarily used as a point guard in college. And I feel like if you get him here, like if you squint, he's kind of DeMar DeRozan, right? Like he can't shoot, he can handle the ball well. He ends up he's probably a better passer than a young DeMar DeRozan is too. I feel like this is the team out of anybody that would take a chance on doing the right development plan with Evan Turner. Um, I don't have any reason really behind that. Who'd you have for Toronto?
I agree 100%, Pat. I took Evan Turner as well. Looking at the team, I thought they were pretty like kind of stacked up, kind of guard and wing or center and wing wise with Chris Bosh, who at that time was really really good. And obviously he went on to have a great career. They had their second leading scorer played the power forward position. They're kind of I mean you have Jarrett Jack, who decent NBA player. Um, and Jose Calderon. I mean, I think that when you kind of need a point guard here, and the only good guard I could really think of was Evan Turner. Um, so yeah, I just not really what you want in a draft, getting Evan Turner, but I mean, I think that this is the best pick you because, like, I mean, this draft class is just really bad, like, just so. I ended up going with Evan Turner as well, though.
Yeah, and in real life they ended up with Ed Davis, who they ended up trading pretty early. So I think this is just a really weird draft. At 14, the Rockets, who originally selected Patrick Patterson. This is where I landed with Greg Monroe. This is a pre-James Harden team, and their starting center was Chuck Hayes, and Chuck Hayes averaged 4 points per game. So if any team is going to take Greg Monroe, who's, you know, I really thought he was a decent player for a little bit in his career. He could go out there, rebound the ball a little bit, and his defense wasn't ever really too great, but he's a good athlete. I feel like this is a place that can immediately take Greg Monroe and play him big minutes. Um, and you look at the rest of the roster, it was Aaron Brooks and Kenyon Martin were their leading scorers, and they already had Trevor Ariza as a role player wing. It really wasn't a horrible infrastructure, and I think they still would make the James Harden trade. Um, just having Greg Monroe there instead of having to get Dwight Howard, I think makes them a little bit better. Who'd you have at 14 for Houston?
So I actually kept their original pick and went with Pat Patterson. Um, I I kind of I just really liked his shooting. Was a big thing for me from the 3 point line. He was one of the better. I mean, he was above league average 35. He was above league average. Um, I think he could have fit in behind those behind like Luis, like looking at their team. I mean, they did have some decent wings, as you said. You mentioned Trevor Ariza, but I don't think Luis Scola. He's kind of aging on the way out. The rest of the guys really aren't well known. So I think that Pat Patterson comes in there and gives you ability to stretch the floor, gives you longevity, and would be well. I think it'd be. I mean, they ended up drafting him, anyways, and didn't really work out. But I think that just looking at the guys available, that Pat Patterson would be the best fit. Yeah.
Yeah, and when I went and looked for Pat Patterson, there were some good on-off swings when he would go onto the floor, and I think a lot of it was him going to play the four as a stretch big right after Lee Scola was going out there with two traditional bigs. And I think that is a perfectly fine fit, especially next to Ariza, because they're still set up to make a James Harden trade later down the line. They still have all the picks. Or, this pick didn't end up going into the James Harden trade. So if you end up getting James Harden still anyway, like I feel like Patterson or Ariza is kind of like what Daryl Morey just dreamed of having at the 4 and 5, at the 3 and 4 for them for the entire Harden tenure. So I think that's great. I guess we have to do it if we're making these picks together. I guess we'll start at 1. We still have Paul George. We both had him. At 2, we had some difference. John Wall versus DeMarcus Cousins. I guess we have to talk one of another into the other pick.
Okay. Oh, dang. Hold up. So talk each other another pick. I think DeMarcus Cousins, honestly, was just. Hold up, bro. Let me pull up. All right. Because I know they had a good point. They had a okay.
Holiday.
So okay, I was looking at it. They already have yeah. You already have two young guards. Okay. Okay, you already have
You've
two young
convinced me.
guards.
You've
You have two
convinced
young
me.
guards. You don't really have a center. DeMarcus Cousins, legit, when entering the league, he was a superstar. He ended up playing great. If he never got hurt, he'd be better than Anthony Davis probably. I mean, I think he was a better player than Anthony Davis when he was in New Orleans.
I don't think
Um,
so.
so that's just my opinion, but I think DeMarcus Cousins was a better fit for the team. Um, I think that if you really look at the stats, he was a little bit better shooting wise as well. He could rebound the ball. Obviously, you don't get the static
Dynamic passing.
finishing of John Wall and the ability to pass and dish the ball very well. The ability to get past defenders and draw the defense in and kick out to shooters on the wing, in the corner. But I mean, no center is guarding DeMarcus Cousins back in the day. Like back in the 2010s, it was very hard to stop DeMarcus Cousins. He was dropping 40 points as a center, and shooting it from three. Um, I mean, I think he was one of the. I'm not going to say
First
that,
big
but
man shooter.
yeah, I think he was the pioneer of the big men shooters. Maybe, but yeah, I just kind of like DeMarcus Cousins mainly just for fit. I think just because you already have Drew Holiday and Lou Williams, and those two guys turned out to be really, really good players. That's the other thing.
Yeah, you've talked me into it. They didn't have the center depth, and I feel bad about Cousins falling to 5 for me. Number 3, I had Hayward, you had Wall. I feel like if Wall was on the board, Wall goes. At number 4, Minnesota. It would be then between Hayward and Eric Bledsoe. I remember
Okay.
looking through Minnesota. I felt like I would have wanted a wing anyway. just because they're still going to have a year or two of Johnny Flynn playing, and then they'll eventually get Ricky Rubio later. So Hayward, I like it 4. At 5, who'd you end up with 5?
I had Monroe. I think you had Whiteside. Or
I
no,
had Boogie.
Boogie. Okay.
I'll pull up the
I mean, I'm
2000.
taking Boogie 100% of the time over him. So if
I mean,
Boogie was still on the board for me, I think I'm still going Boogie.
yeah, but we redrafted Cousins to 2. You talked
Yeah.
me into Cousins at 2.
Okay, okay. So we're doing this together. Okay.
Yeah, so far it's your board, so I don't
Um,
think I would go Monroe in this spot. Like I do not like their bigs, but I don't like anything else with their roster either. And
this
like
is
Hawes and Thompson were like 21 and 23. So like I feel like, I mean, Evans, they were already playing at the 2. I feel like I go Eric Bledsoe at 5 regardless.
okay. I like it. I do. I mean, looking at it now, they don't really have a point guard. Um, they do have Amy Adoku though, so you can't forget that.
Yeah, I saw that one going through it. I was like, Ime Udoka, all right, let's go.
um, but yeah, I think yeah, if Tyreek Evans playing the 2, you don't really have a point guard, so Bledsoe would be a nice little addition.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, he could dish the ball too. I like that. I like Bledsoe.
okay. So your board so far, and then Bledsoe at 5. I'm gonna write this down because we might make an Instagram post out of it. So at 6, I think we're both still Hassan Whiteside.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know why I took Monroe at first over Whiteside, but I like Whiteside more. Yeah, I like
Okay,
Whiteside at 6.
and then at 7, this is where the board really shifted for me, and I had Avery Bradley. I feel
Um,
like, what'd you have?
nah, go ahead.
I feel like the same 6 guys are off the board for me. It just was in a different order. I'm Avery Bradley here, but I'm not tied to it.
I mean, I think I'm going Avery Bradley too. My original pick, Eric Bledsoe's not there, and I still stand by the fact that they need a guard, or not a guard, but I think I
Some
think Eric
defense,
Bledsoe, just some defense and some scoring, like some. We talked about Bradley's ability to shoot the 3, so I think the one thing that might hurt, if maybe honestly maybe Bradley ends up taking on like most of the workload throughout his first couple years, and then turns out to be a way better offensive player uh, than he originally was. But I think I like Avery Bradley here.
just a call to 2013. Like he might just be what KCP ended up being for them anyway.
Mm-hmm.
8 for the Clippers. I had Aminu. You
Yeah,
had
I mean, I had favors, but I think that if I'm looking at what I have available to me right now, uh, you said Aminu at center. Wait,
to the Clippers at 8.
at 8. Aminu's a center though, no, right?
He's a 4, 3
He's a
4.
4. I'm feeling Derek Favors then. I think I like Derek Favors more than Aminu.
Okay, I ended up with Favors at 11, partially because I liked him next to Chris Paul, and I feel
Wait.
like
Oh wait, I'm
I think
tripping.
what
I could see Aminu. I thought you were talking about that the center at Baylor. I was like, Ekpiudo. I was like, what the
no
hell?
no
My
not
bad.
FKU though. No,
Sorry.
he's a second rounder.
Yeah. Actually, he was a 5th pick.
No, but he's in the
6th pick.
redraft. He's a second rounder.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Sorry.
Um,
Sorry.
so
So
where do we
Aminu.
land here?
I think it's maybe between Aminu and Favors. I think that's where we're at right now.
Yeah, because for me, I really liked
Talk me into it, bro.
I liked Aminu because he ended up in the Chris Paul trade,
Okay.
and I was like, you know what, he's still like this is about where I would value him anyway. Like do him over again and trade him for Chris Paul over again. And I liked Derek Favors because
Okay.
I thought he was a good fit next to Chris Paul for New Orleans. So like here you could be
Mm.
like, hey, then he should be a good fit in the Clippers, and they can trade a little bit extra
Um,
and keep Favors to fit next to Chris Paul because they already have Blake Griffin on this team.
if we take in the Chris Paul trade, then I think we go Aminu. If we take into account the Chris Paul trade, I think we go Aminu.
Okay,
But
I
off a
think so.
pure talent standpoint, I'm probably leaning towards Favors.
I
But
I think so too.
I like Aminu here. I'm fine with it.
Yeah. Okay. Number 9 for Utah. I ended up Patrick Patterson.
Okay.
And you had who?
I had Avery Bradley here, but he's
Okay.
off the board. Um, let me take a peek at the Jazz team. So I was just kind of going guard. I think I was looking for guards for the Jazz.
So we're like
I'm
Lance.
just giving you my type of like what I was thinking at this position. Um, I was looking. I was just they have a lot of wing depth. That's kind of in my opinion like what I like CJ Miles. I like Paul Millsap was only 24. Um, Carlos Boozer was only 28 and was averaging almost 20 points a game. So they didn't really have like besides Deron Williams, Rodney Brewer had 9 points a game. So I was just thinking maybe a guard that could get in there and score a little bit. That's why I went with Bradley. But what are you thinking here?
So I like the Patterson fit, and I do like the Avery. I think I would have gotten Avery Bradley if Avery Bradley was here for them. Since it's like us combined, do you want to just take Lance? Since he's more of a guard than a wing with Patterson? Because I
I
had
think
Lance at
Lance would be
10.
nice here. Yeah.
Okay, we'll do
Yeah.
Lance. We'll do Lance there, and then I'm honestly fine with just swapping them. I don't.
Okay.
Who'd you have it for
I had
Indiana at
Jordan.
10?
I had Jordan Crawford initially, but I didn't take into account the fact that uh what's his name Granger's on the way out.
Yeah, he's like on the decline at this point.
And who are we about to take? Who do you have? Sorry.
I ended up with Patterson, and like
Yeah.
since
Okay.
they're
I
not
like
getting Paul
Patterson.
George, I kind of like it.
I like Patterson. I do like Patterson. I mentioned it because he could low key stretch the floor a little bit, and he was 6'8". So he shot 36% from three.
Okay,
So yeah, I like Patterson there.
so at 11 for New Orleans, I ended up with Derek Favors. We moved him up, or we didn't move him up the board.
No, I think we both took favors here. Or I took Al Farouk Aminu, but
Okay,
I would have picked favors instead
yeah,
like so I think we kind of swapped those two as well.
because here you're trying to maximize the last little bit of Chris Paul you have and hope that he doesn't leave. Memphis, I ended up with Ed Davis at 12, and you had
Lance,
Lance,
let's see, Ed Davis, uh,
a 4-5 guy. He ended up with Memphis a couple years later.
yeah, I don't I'm fine with that
Okay,
honestly because yeah
okay.
I don't have the guys pulled up but yeah I like that.
We both had Evan Turner. Unless you want to take Jordan Crawford over him, we're gonna have Evan Turner.
I don't know, man. Just Evan Turner was just so underwhelming, you know, and
I kind of like Crawford on this Toronto
that's what I was
team.
saying. Like Crawford can score way better, and I kind of rock with Crawford, bro. Kind
If the
of like
result, or do you want this to be Greg Monroe?
oh, Monroe hasn't been taken yet. Because Toronto has Bosch though. They have
This
Chris
is right
Bosch.
before he left.
Oh,
Like Bosch
okay.
was definitely gonna leave.
Um,
So for that, I could go
I
Monroe.
think you have to go Monroe. Actually,
Yeah,
yeah, they don't
I
have
think I
a
do
true
like that more
center.
than Turner. Anyway,
Yeah, I think you go. I think you go Monroe here for sure. I like that.
and
And then
then
now we have Houston.
who in real life when Patterson, I gave them Monroe and you gave them Patterson. So
Yeah,
with both those guys off the table, do they get the consolation prize of Evan Turner? Because I don't think that this is a Jordan Crawford fit because they already have Kevin Martin and Aaron Brooks as
yeah.
guard
Then you have.
scorers.
Yeah, I guess you have to get Evan Turner. Yeah.
Poor
Oh,
Houston.
shit, they still had T Mac. What the hell?
I don't know if
Damn,
that's a good
that's weird.
still.
No, he's terrible. What do you mean, glitch?
Yeah,
He had let's see, he played 6 games and averaged 3 points.
it's a good 18 points right there. Um,
Um. So yeah, I think for sure we go Evan Turner.
Final redraft. Paul George, DeMarcus Cousins, John Wall, Gordon Hayward, Eric Bledsoe, Hassan Whiteside, Avery Bradley, Alfred Camino, Lance Stevenson, Patrick Patterson, Derek Favors, Ed Davis, Greg Monroe, Evan Turner. That's our
I
final
think we.
lottery.
I think
Go
both
ahead.
of us all had the same 14 guys, just in different order.
You had Crawford.
Oh, I had Crawford, and then you had who do you have that I
Ed
didn't have?
Davis.
That's what it was. Okay, pretty good for the first time.
Yeah. I mean, this was a very man. There was 5 guys in this class who scored more than 10,000 points. It was a really weird class to sift through for us. Um, next, just go. Do you have anything else also before we outro this one?
This was a
Um,
this was a disappointing draft class to
yeah,
take a look at for sure.
we should have gone back to 2009 to draft Curry one overall and talk about him and James Harden and Blake Griffin. Drew Holiday too. We could have talked about Drew Holiday for a little bit. It would have been really fun. Um, and NBA legend Jeff Teague. Um, but yeah, this was a draft class. We'll probably do these redrafts whenever we have an open episode spot, which won't be too frequently before the All-Star break, but after that we'll probably have a couple coming out for sure. Um, we've started some shorter just videos rather than episodes coming out on Mondays. And then the MLB episodes are now on Thursdays. So yeah, this normal scheduling. I think starting next week, there'll be the start of my MLB top 100 will be coming out.
Ooh,
Um, and then Finn and I will have discuss on that in the MLB episode. So that should do it for this one. We'll see you guys next week with what is a bi-weekly recap. There we go. And yeah, we'll see you guys then.